This happened before we moved to the USA. She was still in Ukraine and I was still in Sweden. We had met whilst I was on tour in Ukraine with my musical act, of which the details are best left for another time. The first time I came back to Ukraine, not on business, but simply to visit her, she took me to her grandparents' old house in the countryside. She had grown spending the summers, holidays, vacations, etc. in this quaint little house in a tiny village with her family. The rest of the time she spent growing up in the ghettos of Kiev. I had already been told so many stories of this house by her. All her best childhood memories came from the time she had spent at this house. She was very close to her grandparents who had both died fairly young under strange circumstances. The house was now empty, although her mother and uncle would sometimes visit to work in the garden or crash for a night. Of course, I wasn't aware of any of this. I was only made privy to all the wonderful tales she told about the place. I couldn't wait to visit. It sounded so ideal and serene. We took a little Chinese bus all the way out to the village and incidentally met her uncle on the way there. He had grown up in the house to which we were headed, and was going to run a quick errand before heading back to the house later to meet us. When we arrived, I was given a brief tour and then we settled in the kitchen to prepare food. The sun was starting to set and as it did, I looked out the window and saw a nun dressed in blue and white walking through the front garden. She then vaporized right in front of my eyes. Probably just a trick of the eyes, I thought to myself, walking closer to the window to try and spot her again. No such luck. My wife, then girlfriend, asked why I was acting so peculiar. I don't want to sound weird or anything, but I think I just saw a nun walking through your garden and then she just vanished, as though she got sucked into another dimension. I stuttered. Don't worry, it's probably just a ghost, she said casually. What do you mean just a ghost? I inquired. Didn't I tell you the house was haunted? I really don't think so. It seems like I would have remembered something like that, I said apprehensively. Don't worry about them. They're fine. I grew up here. They won't bother you. I took her word for it, and we went back to preparing food. She went on to tell me how they would start making a bunch of noise in the attic soon because the sun was going down, and that's just what they do every night when it's dark. 10 minutes or so later, terrible sounds started coming from the attic, footsteps, sounds of chains hitting the floor, hammers hammering. It was weird. However, I continued to trust her word. I assumed the things in the attic were harmless. The darker it became, the noisier, louder and more varied the sounds from the attic became. She kept on preparing the food as though nothing were the matter until her uncle had arrived. We all sat down around the kitchen table. My wife and her uncle saw that I was becoming more and more uneasy. They couldn't help but think it was comical because they were desensitized to it. As they were laughing, I noticed that every time I looked at one of them, their right eye was blurry. I couldn't focus on it. It got to a point where it seemed as though the right sides of their faces were being erased from existence. They kept laughing and talking. Back then, I didn't understand a ton of Russian, so that made me even more uneasy. Ugh, even writing this is giving me the creeps again. My heart had started to race and I was feeling faint. It felt like something was inside my head, tinkering around with stuff, playing with my brain and body. I started sweating and finally had to stand up. I thought I might be having a stroke or seizure, or I don't know what. I walked over to a mirror that was hung at the start of the hallway. I looked at my face. I couldn't see my right eye. No matter how hard I tried to focus, I couldn't see it. I covered my right eye with my hand and my hand was sharply in focus. Then I removed it only to see that entire side of my face disappear halfway into another dimension. It was being sucked away from me. I covered my left eye and let my right eye look at itself. It couldn't focus on itself either. It now looked like it was going to infect the entire right side of my body. I turned around and saw another nun-like figure in the room adjacent. It was all too much. I excused myself and said that I felt faint and that I needed to lie down. I told my wife what was happening and she started acting very strange. She didn't seem to be the girl I knew her to be. There was someone else in there. The noise in the attic was reaching deafening heights. She was saying crazy things. It felt like she was an agent for someone else. I wanted to leave and she was trying to convince me to stay. It was still very early on in the evening. The sun had just gone down. There was no way I was going to make it through the night. I was having insane hallucinations and it felt like someone was trying to rip my soul right out of me. My body was going numb and also felt like it was disappearing from this reality. Her face was shape-shifting. The walls were hyperventilating. I was hyperventilating. Everything had reached a crucial point. I could no longer fight my assailants. I had to flee. I put on my coat and went outside into the frozen streets of this faraway village. As soon as I crossed the threshold of the front door, I felt something let go of me. When I made it out of the garden and onto the street, I felt more let go of me. The hallucinations were diminishing. After a few minutes I was once again able to focus on the right side of the people's faces who were walking by. It was very cold, so I tried walking back towards the house. to retrieve my other clothing. I couldn't do it. As soon as I came nigh the house, the hallucinations began once again. I asked my wife to go back in and retrieve the last of it. It would be a long time until the bus would come, so we walked around the village to kill time. I wasn't going to go back in that house. We eventually made it back to Kiev, but it would take months before I was ever free of whatever happened to me in that house. It followed me back to Sweden and would sometimes visit me. Only this time I was better prepared. My wife had told me to swear at those things and they would go away. It sounded silly, but I suppose she was right, because it seemed to work, even if it had been just mind over matter. Shortly after the incident, when we were back in Kiev, my wife confessed that she felt like she was acting when she was saying all those crazy things. She said she felt like she was saying things that someone else wanted her to say and that she was helpless to stop herself. She felt obliged to keep acting. I couldn't believe that she hadn't warned me. I felt insane for almost a year after that and always felt that there was something in me that wasn't quite mine. She said that she hadn't warned me because she had grown up with it and didn't think it was anything out of the ordinary. Also, she had never been attacked on the same level as I had, and also, because these things that possessed the house were much more benign when her grandparents were alive. Then she went on to tell me about the village and the creepy spiritual politics that go on there. People putting curses on one another, burying spells in each other's backyards, and on and on. Suffice it to say, that was probably the most scared I had ever been in my life. Most notably, because it took so long to leave me. Even today, I am still scarred, and scared, by it. I can easily freak myself out by thinking about it too much. I don't pretend to know what it was or what it was trying to do to me. Thank you for watching this story. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. If you're feeling brave enough, leave a comment and let us know which story was the most frightening for you. And if you have any horror stories of your own that you'd like to share, we'd love to hear them.